Thank you. And now for something completely different, because we are very, very grateful to Marco and Alberto for putting the spotlight on this region, which is pretty much last year known in Silicon Valley. But also we are relatively close to dinner, so we will definitely go for shock value if we can. We are a cluster of countries which is desperately looking for a brand, an innovation brand. We have been called, Central and Eastern Europe, CEE, New Europe. I have even heard Danube Valley. That was the last one I heard. Let's leave it as the job of journalists to come up with a brand, or maybe that of ours, or that our ecosystem. But what we've seen so far in the last few years is that this region is developing a very coherent vision about how it imagines the future after sharing a common history and a common mindset. So the ambition to become a technology and innovation powerhouse is pretty much shared by all governments and all the ecosystem players across Central and Eastern Europe. Now, how to walk that talk, that will be the question of our panel right now. Let me drop in a few key data points and trends what we have seen, which may be shocking to some of you who are reading reports. So first of all, I wanted to emphasize that I think that the most connecting element between these countries and the startups between these countries, coming from these countries, is that because of the relative small size of the markets, they really learned to think global from day one. I think that's a major differentiating factor. It's a necessity. It's an imperative to think global. Secondly, about the talent present across the region, what we can see clearly is that there is not a major discrepancy between the ratio of knowledge-intensive industry workers in Western Europe and in CEE. It's only like a few percentage points, like 35 to 37. That's the average. So the structure of the industry, the knowledge economy is present with full force in these regions. The relative inexpensive nature of technical talent I think, is gaining traction in Silicon Valley. It's being known, but the quality of that talent is something what needs to be emphasized, as well as the competitive advantage of Europe and especially CEE of producing like mobile developers. I don't know if you heard that, but 1.5 times, so the EU is producing 1.5 times the amount of mobile developer graduates each year compared to the US. I think that's a traction we have to keep. Also, funding-wise and investment in R&D and innovation in governments, by governments in CEE, the relative low spending historically, what they did, which was about half the average of the EU, has been compensated or counterbalanced by the billions of euros what the EU has been providing for the region to develop its infrastructure and to invest in innovation. Recent traction, this is completely changing. This landscape is completely changing right now. So recently we can say that players like the Czech Republic and Slovenia are now spending as much as the EU average in R&D and innovation. Slovakia is growing 4 times the European average in R&D and innovation spending. My home country, Hungary, is investing very consciously into self-driving cars and other frontier technologies. Estonia is already a household name with its e-initiatives, and so on and so forth. So I think that we can cite a few very good examples when they are actually getting traction. And again, as I said in the beginning, it's time to walk the talk. So let's move on and ask the first round robin questions from the panelists. And the first question, which may be a little provocative, is that if Central and Eastern Europe and its innovation ecosystem would have a Tinder profile, what would be on it? So how would you differentiate yourself and the region? What is the thing? What are the major traits and strong points? What Silicon Valley doesn't know about us, but they should know? So, ladies first.
So for Poland, I would say that's twofold. First is the mindset. It comes from our history, most recent history, and the further one. So we have an extreme motivation and an energy right now. We came to the point when in the past we couldn't do that much. We always had scientists, we always had good minds, but we couldn't really develop this. And starting in the 90s, more opportunities appeared, but we needed some more time to travel, to see how it's done in different places. So right now is a perfect point when we acquire the skills and the knowledge, and we have the opportunities. So we are very, very much motivated to actually put this all to work. And I can see this every day. It's been the last maybe decade where it's changing tremendously. And the second part of it is the numbers. We are graduating 200,000 engineering students yearly in Poland. So when you put together those two things, it's just a secret sauce.
Super impressive,
Yeah.
Maja. Andrej, your take?
Yeah, so I think like the standard cliche about CE is that we are great technologists who can't sell themselves, which I think is actually partially true. But maybe like to hone in just how good of technologists we are. Like if you look at HackerRanks, which is this website where a lot of coders go to take challenges and some classes. They have roughly 1.5 million coders on the website. They did a ranking of the top developers in the world by country. And actually, so the first was China, second was Russia, third is Poland, fifth is Hungary, ninth is Czech Republic, 10th is Slovakia, 11th is Ukraine. Like 5 out of the 10 top countries in the world come from CE. Like US is 26th. And another interesting data point about that is we have a lot of our portfolio companies have a team here and in CE. And they say it's not that the difference is that they are that much cheaper. It's that no matter how much money you pay, you're just not going to get the same technical talent here as you can back at home. A, is because the best guys are working on some of the greatest problems, for example, Google is solving. But I recently spoke to a senior person at Airbnb, and he's like, quite frankly, like we have pretty B to C class engineers in our company. And the interesting thing about that is that, you know, 2 of those engineers go and start a startup, and a lot of people will be like, oh, wow, these guys were at Airbnb. They must be pretty good. And then you have 2 Central Europeans who are probably much better technologists, and they're like, you worked where? And you come from where? And you have what kind of accent? Yeah, and there goes your funding, right? So that's sort of on the how good of technologists we are. And whether we can sell ourselves, well, let's see with the next questions.
That's shock value for you. Aleš?
Yeah, well, I agree with all that was said, and I would add to this the Slovenian perspective that I can say that we are persistent, stubborn sometimes, that we were always, also through the history, surrounded by the big nations, but we managed to survive. We managed to survive also because we didn't care about that fact that we are a relatively small nation. Today, only 2 million. And that we know that big, it's not necessarily the important to be successful. We showed a couple of days ago when we won the European Basketball Championships. Only 2 million population, the smallest nation ever in the history of the European Basketball Championship that won. And that goes not only in the sport, but also in the business, also in the mentality. So the stubbornness, let's say, is also important for all the nations that we are from.
Absolutely. Let's do the second round in a really stubborn manner then. Second question to you all, you guys. So we have reached a certain level of maturity as the CE ecosystem, which is pretty hard to define right now, but there is a certain cohesion. We have been following some international examples. We have been building on some of the national characteristics, and I think that combination is very important. Where do you see it going from now in your respective countries or all across the region, if you have an impression about that? What are the key trends determining that, and what are the paths to success from now, from this point? Who wants to start?
I can start. And I think it addresses the second part, like how good can we sell ourselves? And I think this part is more about like what kind of companies we can build as opposed to how we can sell ourselves. And it's true that we have great technical talent, which doesn't necessarily have such great talent at building global companies yet, just because not that many were built. But they are being built at increasingly fast rate, as the other presentations presented. And those people from the US who go past sort of our strange accents and jokes, actually recognize, I'll give you an example of Data Collective. It's a big fund, over 1 billion in assets under management. And they devoted $100 million to a machine learning lab in Central Europe. And they hired roughly 40 people from the machine learning background and gave them very senior positions in Prague, Bratislava, to start working on startups and building them together with their US counterparts. And that's where the next generation of company building talent is being incubated. So now you combine the superior technologies that come out of our region, you give them the right experience in building the global companies out of our region, and that's where the next generation of the great company founders will come from.
I think the key would be to focus on specific areas where we are strong. So maybe not try to bring all of our companies that are innovative, but maybe those, well, for example, fintech industry in Poland is doing extremely well comparing even to here. And the reason is that a lot of our banks were built along with those companies. There were not, 100, 200-year-old institutions in Poland at that time. So as they were building, they're basically innovating together with our companies right now. There's no problem for Polish startups I talk to have a pilot, to even the largest banks. So in a way, we have to find the niche that we have like this, where we are already much more advanced. Some of our banks have technology that is not here. And then develop it there and then bring it here. So look for opportunities like this.
Yeah, yes, I would call it the world is changing, and we are witnessing the regional specialization on certain aspects of the production, of certain productions. And that's why each nation actually, or each region has to develop its own system of innovations. And speaking about, I think the three countries, I think that we have relatively good developed startup scene with good networks, with good ideas, with good also support from the states. What we need, not only in Slovenia, but I'm speaking for the whole of European Union, is to help the startups to grow and to scale up, to go through the phase that is critical. As it was said, only 2% earlier. This is something that we have to work on. This is something that we have to put more emphasis, of course, not only with the financial support, although this is also part of the activities, but also with the establishing the right social, let's say, environment, stimulating the people, the young people, to stay in Europe, to find here the satisfactions, to, of course, stimulate the environment with different incentives that we can do. I think this is very important, starting from the education system, connecting universities even more to the industry. This is something that we are not good enough, and of course, all other aspects of the social, let's say, systems.
Getting back to you right now, so in your governmental position, how do you see the unique role of governments in Central and Eastern Europe? It's always a controversial issue here in Silicon Valley, like what government funding is the right amount of funding, or what support is the right amount of support, what does not distort the market. So how do you think that it could be a unique contributor and supporter of building an ecosystem? That's question number one. And 1.5 is how would you convince a US scale-up to enter the European market through Central and Eastern Europe?
Well, first of all, I must say that it's very important, at least for me, that I'm here, that I'm listening what you are saying, that I am, of course, try to feel your ideas, also some of the problems, in order to then maybe make some good changes, or to make a policy that will bring some results. Well, speaking from the governmental, let's say, position, I would say, as I said, financial support is important, that we still go on, although I know that directly financial support will go down. We have to create, as I said, environment that will stimulate in the future, not only or only with the support from the money, but also other things are important. This is one. Then, of course, when we talk about what we can do, is important that we create an European ecosystem that will function, that we, let's say, go together, especially saying about small countries. Let's go together to Silicon Valley to see what they're and how they are doing there, not only for a couple of days, that is what's already said, but for the, let's say, to get the good practice and to bring this good practice to Europe. If we will succeed this, then I'm sure that also the American companies, American startups will be maybe interesting for going to Europe, because we can help them to understand the European market, not only European market, but also maybe a little bit broader, from Russia to Turkey. This could be an advantage. At least I know for Slovenian perspective, we have these good networks, we have the experiences, we have the connections, and we can be, let's say, a window or the entering points to the other markets that might be more interesting than only Slovenia with 2 million population.
Yeah, I really love the fact that these ties between our countries are starting both bottom up and top down right now. So governments are cooperating more and more, and the ecosystem itself is actually basically leaning through the borders and connecting with each other on its own. So I really love that it came together like that. Maja, let's talk about Poland a little bit, because what you did as the Polish accelerator is something which is, I think, relatively well known in Silicon Valley. This is a very successful governmental program and a great example of like how a CE government can help its entrepreneurs enter the global market through Silicon Valley. So can you tell us, like, you know, your examples, your best practices, lessons learned, some success stories from that accelerator, and how does it grow from here?
Yes, so first, along the line of working together with other countries, that's one of the things that we all here in the Valley believe is important. So I am close to working with offices of other countries, with Central European countries. As CE Connection, we have a group with Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, where we are trying to find common agendas and work together. For my own initiative, the focus really is, in a more general sense, on building credibility of the region. We are doing many things very well, but people here don't know about it, as we all know. So really, for our companies, what I hear, the biggest challenge is to find the first client, to have the first contact. And once they have someone here, they know others will follow, because they will do a good job, they will be great, so they will have a reference point. So that's the challenge. So we are identifying areas, as I mentioned before, that we have strong examples of good companies where we can bring them. And then building on that, we'll develop specific areas for technology, like cybersecurity, fintech, AI, where we have companies ready to come here. And then based on those, and of course the outsourcing software area where Poland has so many brilliant engineers, this is more of a service. But we also do it, and it should be accessible here. They should be working 24/7 for people here, and they are doing this, but we can do more in this area as well.
Okay, Andrej, you are a VC, and very good at that, by the way. So what would be your 3 pieces of advice, the top 3 pieces of advice you would give to Silicon Valley VCs who don't know much about, you know, Central and Eastern Europe? What should they learn? What is the absolute must-know from the VC perspective?
Since the big red light is blinking at me, I'll just say 1. You know, the story I mentioned about Data Collective investing in Central Europe, well, the partner who is leading it has a Slovak wife. And that's how he learned about sort of our region. That's why he spends time now. And my advice is not that all US VCs have to marry Slovak men and women, but it is that they have to get to know the culture and be willing to look, you know, as I said, past the accents. And I will give you an example of that. A Romanian company called UiPath, they are doing pretty well now, raised about $30 million from Excel about 1 year before they raised some seed round from us. And there were a couple of American investors looking at it. And they're like, dude, like, why didn't you tell me they're raising money? Like, now it's going to be so expensive. And I'm like, yeah, because the first time I showed you the company, you told me that the CEO has an accent like Dracula. Well, now that Dracula is raising money at 15 times the valuation, so if you look past that accent, you might be making 10 to 15 times your money on paper by now. So I guess that's in general the advice I would give. You know, be open-minded. They come from different cultures, but there's a lot more substance to it than might meet the eye. And you might get positively surprised.
Awesome.
If may, just one additional reason why to come to Europe. Okay, I will say why to come to Istria, again about Istria. Slovenia owns part of the Istria. You will enjoy a good Mediterranean, the Adriatic Sea, good wine, good food. So this is 3 reasons why come.
So key takeaways, Dracula can raise money. Marrying Slovak women is very much optional. And the third one is like, if you ever wanted to learn more about the CE innovation ecosystem, you can find us. So all the questions you always wanted to know about us, but you never dared to ask, here we are. Thank you so very much for your attention.